Well, look who it is, Darius. Still standing tall, I see. Or is that just the suit? Cheers to that. Oh, really now?
Just a reminder.
Ha! Classic.
Still wearing that same humble little smile, Darius. Monique said it with a laugh in her voice, and poison under it. The exact way she used to do when she wanted a room to lean in and watch me get smaller. I had barely stepped into the ballroom when she spotted me. The reunion committee had booked the rooftop hall of a hotel in Midtown Atlanta, all glass walls and gold light, a soft jazz trio in the corner, people pretending 20 years hadn't happened to their knees, their hairlines, or their regrets. But some people age into peace, and some people age into performance. Monique had aged into performance. She lifted her champagne flute and looked me up and down like she was reviewing damage after a storm. 9 years after the divorce, she said, loud enough for the circle around her to hear. And you still look like a man who says, "I'm working on something big," instead of actually having something big. A few people laughed. Not everybody. Just the ones who always laugh first and think later. I stood there in my charcoal suit, one hand in my pocket, the other still holding the little paper name tag I hadn't bothered sticking on yet, and I let the words pass through me. That was the thing Monique never understood about me. Silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means a man has finally learned which battles aren't worth paying for with his peace. Then she tilted her head and smiled harder. "And where's this wife I heard about?" she asked. "Or was that just something you told people so they wouldn't feel sorry for you?" That got a bigger reaction. Because humiliation is a social sport when the right crowd thinks they're safe. Her boyfriend, Terrence, stood beside her with one hand in his pocket and the other resting on the stem of his drink like he'd practiced that pose in a mirror. He was the kind of man who wore success louder than he actually lived it. Polished shoes, expensive watch, perfect beard line, and that smug stillness that comes from believing money can do the heavy lifting character never learned how to do. He gave me a little nod, the kind men give each other when one thinks he's already won. "You know," he said, "Monique's told me a lot about you. Hard-working, quiet, good with your hands. That's respectable." Respectable. The word landed like a pat on the head. I looked at him and smiled. "That's one word for it." Monique laughed again. "See? Same old Darius. Still answering like a man who doesn't want the full truth told." If this had happened 10 years earlier, I would have felt that familiar heat rise in my chest. I would have started explaining myself, started proving, started reaching into my own life, like I owed the room an inventory of what I'd built since she left. But I was 43 now. I had spent nearly a decade learning that the people most committed to misunderstanding you are usually the ones most threatened by what your quiet might eventually become. "My wife's on her way," I said. Monique's eyebrows went up immediately. "Oh, she exists now?" "She does." "What's her name?" "Imani." "Mm-hmm," she said, like she was humoring a child. "And let me guess, she's gorgeous, successful, and madly in love with you too." I held her stare. All three. Somewhere behind me, somebody muttered, "Damn." Monique turned toward the little cluster around her like she was hosting a show. "Y'all hear that? Darius didn't just invent a wife, he invented a whole miracle." More laughter. Terrence sipped his drink and studied me in a way I noticed immediately. Not mocking me, measuring me. That's when I knew he recognized something Monique didn't. Some men know what real money looks like, even when it isn't trying to be seen. The watch on my wrist had belonged to my father. My suit was tailored but plain. My shoes were clean, soft leather, not flashy. I wasn't wearing labels where people could read them from 10 feet away, and that alone can confuse folks who think wealth is just branding with better lighting. I smiled once more, then stepped away before Monique could set up another line. The room was filling in. Old classmates were hugging, lying about how great everybody looked, telling the same stories with newer stomachs and older eyes. Through the glass, Atlanta shimmered below us, red taillights crawling through the streets, a summer storm threatening beyond the skyline. I moved toward the bar and ordered sparkling water. That's where Renee found me. Renee and I had been friends since 11th grade, back when she wore hoop earrings big enough to catch sunlight and corrected teachers with the confidence of a future attorney. She was still like that now, only sharper. Corporate litigator, unmarried by choice. The kind of friend who never flooded you with advice, but when she did speak, it was usually because the truth had gotten too obvious to ignore. "Told you not to come empty-handed," she said, sliding up beside me. I glanced at her. What was I supposed to bring? A slideshow? No, your wife. She's coming. Renee looked toward Monique's group, where my ex was already laughing too hard at something Terrence had said. She's putting on a show. She always did. Renee studied me for a second. You okay? I took a sip. I was okay before I walked in. I'm not about to become un-okay because Monique still confuses volume with power. Renee smiled. There he is. Truth is, I almost didn't come that night. When the reunion invite first hit my phone 2 weeks earlier, I had stared at it in the parking lot of one of our sites on Auburn Avenue while my project manager was waiting for me to approve revised structural drawings. I had all the reasons in the world not to go. Work, meetings, deadlines. Better things to do than revisit a room full of people who knew the version of me that still apologized for taking up space. But Imani had looked over my shoulder when I showed her the invite that evening in our kitchen and said, "Maybe you should go." I laughed. To what? Eat dry chicken and pretend I remember people I haven't thought about in 20 years? No, she said, slicing limes for grilled salmon like this wasn't a serious conversation at all. To stand in a room that used to hold an older version of you and realize you don't live there anymore. That's Imani. She never talks in speeches. Just clear little sentences that follow you around until you admit they were right. So I came. And now Monique had me in her sights before the first hour was over. There was a time when that would have ruined my night. There was also a time when Monique was my whole future. Back when we were 22 and living in a one-bedroom apartment off Cascade Road with bad plumbing and a stove that only worked if you turned the knob halfway first, I loved her in the only way I knew how then. Through endurance. Through effort. Through showing up tired and leaving later. Through fixing things, carrying things, paying for things I could barely afford, and calling it devotion because I didn't yet know the difference between love and self-erasure. Monique had dreams, and I respected that. She wanted better clothes, better circles, better zip codes, better everything. She used to say she wasn't trying to be rich, just done struggling. I believed her. So I worked. I took weekend electrical jobs, weekday framing contracts, overnight warehouse shifts when I had to. I missed birthdays. I missed barbecues. I missed sleep. I sold my father's old motorcycle to cover the down payment on the boutique salon certification program she swore would change her life. I never told her where the money came from. I wanted her to feel supported, not guilty.
You know what she said when I handed her the envelope? "Finally! I was starting to think you didn't believe in me." That should have told me everything. But when you love someone, you can turn red flags into background decor if you stare at them long enough.
The first time she really embarrassed me in public, we were at a friend's engagement dinner in Buckhead. Somebody asked what I did, and before I could answer, Monique leaned back in her chair and said, "He's one of those men with potential. You know, hardworking, loyal, always building toward something." People smiled politely. Even then, I knew what she had done. She had translated me into something digestible, something temporary. A man worth keeping only if his future arrived on time. And for years, I accepted that version of myself because I thought love meant being patient with the people who wounded you, as long as they did it in a tone soft enough to pass as personality. The marriage ended the way a lot of marriages do when the truth has been moving furniture in the dark for too long. Quietly at first, then all at once. I found out about Terrence 6 months before she left. Not officially, not through some dramatic confession. Through patterns. Through little lies that stopped making sense when placed side by side. Through receipts. Through the fact that she started defending a man I hadn't accused yet. Terrence was just helping with networking, just introducing her to people, just encouraging her to think bigger than the life we had. Men like that don't usually steal women. They steal dissatisfaction and let it put on lipstick. By the time Monique left, she didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. That part hurt more than I admitted to anybody. Because betrayal you can fight with. Relief tells you the person had already emotionally packed long before the suitcases came out. After the divorce, I went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. There's a difference. A lot of people thought I disappeared because I had failed. What really happened was simpler and much harder. I stopped narrating my life for an audience that had mistaken my openness for access. I poured everything into the business. Back then, it wasn't a business the way people say that word now. It was just me, 2 crews, a used truck, a tiny office, and enough reputation to stay 1 invoice ahead of panic. But I knew what I was good at. I knew how buildings breathe. I knew how neighborhoods change when people with no roots start making decisions about people with deep ones. And I knew black families in Atlanta deserved better than cheap promises wrapped in luxury language. So I started small. Renovations, historic repairs, commercial rehab, then adaptive reuse, then mixed-income housing, then city partnerships, then full redevelopment work. Slowly, quietly, the thing Monique used to mock as "you and your little construction dreams" became Cole Urban Development. By year 5, we were in rooms I once needed permission to enter. By year 7, we were buying projects instead of begging to bid on them. By year 9, we were finalizing a deal so large, even I had to sit with it in silence the first time I saw the final numbers. 2 days before that reunion, my team closed on the Mason Square redevelopment package, a multi-phase project on Atlanta's west side combining housing, retail, workforce training space, and a performing arts wing for youth programs. $390 million all in. Public-private structure. 87 pages of signatures. Years of planning. Years of community meetings. Years of being underestimated by men who only understood how to build for profit, not for permanence. Terrence had been bragging about Mason Square for months on social media. Not as the owner, because he wasn't, not even close, but as a consultant orbiting the deal hard enough to make people think he was one of the brains behind it. That was what made seeing him beside Monique almost funny. He had no idea the man she was laughing at owned the thing he'd been using to impress people. I hadn't planned to say a word about that night. That's important, because the best part of real success is how little it needs a dramatic entrance. I checked my phone. No message from Imani yet. She had texted earlier that a hospital foundation dinner was running behind schedule, but she'd make it. Monique must have seen me glance down because she floated over again, this time with Terrence and 2 women from our graduating class trailing behind her like backup singers. "No text from Wonder Wife?" she asked. "She's on her way." "Baby, at this point, she's on her way from imagination," Terrence chuckled. One of the women, Keisha, looked uncomfortable already. "Monique." But Monique was warmed up now. "No, because I really want to know. You spent years acting like one day everybody would regret doubting you. And now here you are at the reunion alone, holding sparkling water like it's a personality trait." I looked at her, calmly. "Why are you so invested in whether I came alone?" That hit. The smile on her face tightened a little. "I'm not invested," she said quickly. "I'm amused." Those aren't the same thing. She folded one arm and lifted her glass again. "Fine. I'm amused by a man who spent our whole marriage saying he was building something and still looks like he shops based on coupons." Terrence laughed louder than necessary this time. I let the silence sit there a beat too long, then asked him, "And what is it you do again, Terrence?" That room changed by 1 degree the moment I said that. Because men like him don't like being interviewed by men they've already filed under harmless. He smiled. "Development advisory." "That a real thing, or one of those titles people say when they mostly attend lunches?" Keisha choked on her drink. Monique snapped, "See? This is exactly why nothing ever changed with you. You get insecure, then sarcastic." "Insecure?" I repeated. "You came across the room twice." Renee looked down into her glass to hide the grin. Terrence straightened. "You know, Darius, nobody's attacking you." I nodded slowly. "That's funny, because it really sounded like y'all had scheduled programming." Monique's eyes flashed. That was the first moment of the night she realized I was not going to stand there and absorb her performance like the old version of me used to. Then, before she could answer, the reunion MC tapped the microphone and asked everyone to settle in for a special alumni presentation. People started turning toward the little stage near the windows. Monique leaned closer to me and lowered her voice. "You always do this. You act calm, but underneath it, you need people to think you've become more than you were." I looked at her for a long second. "No," I said. "Underneath it, I just became more than you were around long enough to see." Something in her face changed then. Not remorse, not yet. Just the first hairline crack in certainty. We all moved toward the seating area. Round tables, white cloths, centerpieces trying too hard. The MC, a cheerful dentist from our class who suddenly thought he was Steve Harvey, thanked sponsors, cracked reunion jokes, and then said the school had a major announcement involving alumni investment in the community. I barely paid attention at first, because just then I felt a soft hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there she was. Imani. Emerald gown. Hair swept back. Diamond studs I bought her 3 anniversaries ago because she said she wanted something classic, not loud. Warm brown skin catching chandelier light. Calm eyes. Grace without effort. She didn't move like a woman trying to impress a room. She moved like a woman too anchored to be edited by one. Sorry, baby, she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The donor family at Grady kept asking follow-up questions, and if I left when I wanted to, I would have had to fake a fire alarm. Renee burst out laughing. I smiled fully for the first time that night. You made it. Of course I made it. Then she glanced around and read the room in about half a second, the way brilliant women do. Monique had gone pale. Not because Imani was beautiful, though she was. Not even because Imani was elegant in that quiet, expensive, impossible-to-copy kind of way. But because recognition had started moving through the room. A man from 3 tables over whispered, "Isn't that Dr. Imani Cole?" Another woman said, "The pediatric surgeon? The one on the board for the West Side Youth Health Initiative?" Imani smiled politely at a few people who recognized her, then took the empty seat beside me like none of this was unusual. Monique stared. "You're his wife?" Imani turned with that same gentle composure. "I am." Terrence looked between us too quickly. Now he knew. Not everything, but enough. Men like him survive off social clues. The minute he saw people recognizing Imani, the minute he saw how comfortable she looked beside me, the minute he connected my last name to the rumor trail around Mason Square, I could almost hear the math start failing in his head. The MC kept talking, unaware of the private earthquake at our table. Monique tried to recover. "Well, wow, I didn't realize Darius had remarried." Imani smiled. Happily. The word was soft. It still landed like a gavel. Monique's laugh came out thin. "That's wonderful, really. We were just catching up." Renee muttered, "Sure you were," and took a sip. Then the principal of our old high school came to the microphone. She talked about budget gaps, arts programs, students needing more than survival from the adults around them. Then she spoke about a new alumni-backed initiative, a scholarship fund, a digital media lab, and the restoration of the old auditorium that had been closed for years because the city never allocated enough to bring it back safely. The donors requested privacy while the work was being negotiated, she said. But tonight they agreed to let us thank them properly. I folded my hands. Imani reached for mine under the table. Monique looked from the stage to me, then away again, because some part of her already knew she didn't want the next 30 seconds to belong to the truth. The principal smiled. "Please help me thank Dr. Imani Cole and Mr. Darius Cole." The room erupted. Applause first, then that sharp wave of recognition that only comes when gossip loses the race to reality. People turned fully in their seats. A few even stood. Imani squeezed my hand once and rose gracefully. I stood with her. We didn't make a show of it, just acknowledged the applause and the principal's thanks. Monique looked like the air had changed density around her. Terrence blinked twice and set his drink down. The principal continued. Their commitment made the auditorium restoration possible, and their company's support is also linked to the vocational pathway partnership being launched through the Mason Square redevelopment. Now Terrence's face really changed, because there it was, publicly, cleanly, irrefutably. Not his deal, mine. He tried to hold still, but his jaw set hard. People started whispering all around us. Mason Square? That Mason Square? I thought Terrence was involved with that. Involved ain't the same as owning. I almost laughed. Almost. We sat back down, and for a minute Monique couldn't speak. Then she leaned toward me and said very quietly, You own Mason Square? I took a sip of water. My company leads it, yes. She stared. But Terrence said, I'm sure Terrence says a lot of things. That one nearly made Renee spill her drink. Terrence cleared his throat. Let's not act like development is a one-man operation. Agreed, I said. That's why we keep records. He said nothing after that. And now, because God has a sense of timing that humans like to call irony, the MC invited me to say a few words. I hadn't planned a speech. That was fine. I'm better without one. I walked to the stage, looked out at the room, and saw versions of my old life sitting at every table. Kids who used to think I was quiet because I lacked confidence. Teachers who probably wondered what became of me. Men who talked big at 17 and peaked at 29. Women who once said I had kind eyes, like that was a compliment you give a man when you don't yet respect his future. And Monique. Sitting very still now. I thanked the school. I thanked the teachers who taught us before anybody had social media to film their failures and no funding to reward their effort. I thanked the tradesmen who taught me how to read a wall before I learned how to read a contract. I talked about the difference between building things to be seen and building things to last. Then I said something I hadn't planned until the words were already on their way out. Some people think success is the moment the room finally claps for you, I said. But most of what changed my life happened long before anybody was watching. It happened in tired mornings, late invoices, hard choices, and keeping my word when there was no applause attached to it. I'm grateful for what my wife and I get to give back. But the truth is, the real blessing isn't the deal. It's becoming the kind of man who can hold one without needing it to prove he deserved respect in the first place. The room got very quiet after that. Not awkward quiet. Thinking quiet. I thanked them and stepped down. When I got back to the table, Imani looked at me the way she always does when I say more than I thought I had in me. Like she had heard the words, but she was also listening to what it took for them to finally exist. Monique didn't wait long. The second dinner service started, she said, "Can we talk?" Imani looked at me, leaving the choice in my hands. I stood. Sure. We walked a few feet away, near the windows, the city glowing below us. Monique crossed her arms first, then uncrossed them. Her confidence was gone now, and without it, she looked less glamorous and more tired. Not old, just tired in the soul. You never told anybody, she said. About what? About any of this. The money, the projects, the school. I shrugged slightly. It wasn't any of your business. She winced like the sentence had edges. Then she said, "You made me look stupid tonight." I almost couldn't believe that was where she chose to begin. I looked at her. Monique, you walked over to me and started taking a hammer to your own image in public. I just stood there. She looked away toward the skyline. For a minute, she said, softer now, I really thought you were bluffing about your wife. I know. You always were so private. No, I said. I became private after learning what happens when people treat your vulnerability like a weak investment. She nodded once, barely. Then came the line I think she had been holding back since Imani walked in. I didn't think you would do better after me. There it was, rawer than the rest. Not because she loved me, not because she missed me, but because some part of her identity had depended on being right to leave. I answered honestly. I didn't do better after you to punish you. I did better because surviving you taught me I had to. Her eyes filled a little then, though no tears fell. That's harsh. It's true. She swallowed. Were you ever going to tell me about Terrence in Mason Square? I tilted my head. What about it? Her expression changed again. He told me he was a major partner. I let a beat pass. He isn't. He said he had leverage in the project. If by leverage you mean a consultant badge and a habit of standing near important people at lunch, then sure. Despite everything, Monique almost laughed. Shame can do that sometimes. It cracks and lets honesty breathe for half a second. Then her face tightened again. So I got played. I didn't answer. She looked at me. Say it. You want me to what? Comfort you because the man you chose for status turned out to be a salesman in a better suit? She flinched. I'm not trying to be cruel, I said more quietly. But I'm also not going to lie to make this easier on your pride. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she asked, Did you know, back then, about him? Yes. She went still. For how long? Long enough. And you never said anything? I looked out over the city before I answered. At first, I thought if I worked harder, loved harder, provided better, you'd choose me completely on your own. By the time I understood that wasn't how respect works, the marriage was already a room with no oxygen in it. Monique pressed her lips together. I wasn't worth fighting for, she whispered. That was the first truly honest sentence she'd spoken all night. I turned back toward her. That's not what happened. I was worth more than begging. She shut her eyes briefly. Behind us, I could feel the room moving on, plates landing, servers passing, conversations reviving now that the main drama had already chosen its side. Monique opened her eyes again. I used to think you were too small for the life I wanted. And now? She laughed once without humor. Now I think I was too hungry for the wrong kind of life. That hit me harder than anything else she'd said, because it was the nearest thing to accountability I had ever heard from her. I could have cut deeper then. I could have told her about the nights I sat in the truck after 14-hour days, too tired to walk inside, because I knew one more sarcastic comment from her would undo the little dignity I had left. I could have told her about the journal I kept for nearly 2 years after the divorce, writing down every lie I had once believed about myself so I'd never make a home inside them again. I could have told her that Imani loved me in all the places Monique only evaluated me. But victory that needs a speech is usually insecurity in better shoes. So I just said, I hope you figure out what matters before life has to humiliate you to teach it. That one landed. Not because it was loud, because it was true. Terrence must have seen the conversation reaching a place he didn't control because he walked over with that fake smoothness men use when they think damage management is still possible. Everything good over here? He asked. I looked at him. Depends. You still introducing yourself like Mason Square belongs to you? His smile froze. Monique turned toward him slowly. You lied to me. Monique, this is not the place. You said you had real equity in the project. I said I was connected. She laughed then, but it wasn't the old laugh. This one sounded like a glass giving up. Connected, she repeated. That's what you told me to make me feel secure? He lowered his voice. You're making a scene. She stared at him. No, I made a scene earlier. This is clarity. I didn't stay for the rest. That's another difference between the man I was and the man I became. The old version of me would have lingered, watched the fallout, fed on the apology he thought he deserved. The newer version understood that closure doesn't always happen where the wound was made. I walked back to the table, took Imani's hand, thanked Renee for forcing me to come, and told her she was obnoxiously right. She smiled. I know. Drive safe. Imani and I took the elevator down in comfortable silence. In the lobby, the jazz was softer. Outside, the storm had finally broken, and the city smelled like rain on concrete and summer leaves. The valet brought the car around, and I opened the door for my wife. On the drive home, Atlanta looked honest. Wet streets, neon reflections, Waffle House still lit like it had a covenant with insomnia. Young people under awnings laughing too loud. A MARTA train sliding past in the distance like a silver line through memory. Imani waited until we were halfway down Peachtree before she spoke. You okay? I thought about the question longer than it should have needed. Then I said, Yeah, I think I actually am. She nodded once, looking out at the rain. You didn't need that room nearly as much as that room needed to see you. I smiled. That sounds like something you've been saving. I had it ready in case you got dramatic. I laughed. And then, because marriage is sometimes just safety with a witness, I told her the part I hadn't told many people in full. About how small I let myself become near the end with Monique. About how I confused patience with permission. About how there were nights I sat in the dark, convinced that if I could just achieve enough, she'd stop treating me like unfinished furniture. Imani listened the way she always does, not interrupting to rescue me from my own memory, just present. When I finished, she said, The cruelest thing broken love does is make people believe they have to audition for basic tenderness. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. That's exactly what it felt like, I admitted. She put her hand on my arm. You don't live there anymore. When we got home, the porch light was on. That simple detail nearly undid me. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. A light left on by someone who expects you back is one of the most healing things in the world when you've spent years coming home to emotional weather. Inside, I took off my jacket and loosened my tie. Imani went to the kitchen and put water on for tea, though neither of us really wanted tea. That's just what we do after long days. Ritual gives peace somewhere to sit down. I stood by the counter for a while, looking out the window at the rain in the backyard, and thought about how strange life is. The woman who once made me feel unchosen had watched another woman choose me without hesitation in front of a room full of witnesses. The man who used to be full of potential had become the man funding stages, scholarships, and city blocks. The reunion I almost skipped had turned into the last door on a hallway I didn't need anymore. I slept deeply that night. No replaying conversations, no fantasy comebacks, no late anger. Just sleep. The next morning, I woke before Imani, made coffee, and sat on the back steps while the city slowly turned itself on. Birds in the fence line, distant traffic, a lawn crew 2 houses over starting too early, because capitalism has no respect for Saturdays. My phone buzzed. A text from Monique. I'm sorry for last night, and maybe for more than last night. I looked at it for a long time. Then I locked the screen and set the phone down beside me. Some messages don't need replies to be answered. A few minutes later, Imani came out in one of my old college sweatshirts, took one look at my face, and sat beside me with her mug. she texted. I nodded. You gonna respond? I thought about it. Then I said, no, not because I hate her, because I finally don't need anything from her. Imani smiled into her coffee. That's expensive peace. She was right. People think wealth is houses, contracts, donor dinners, ownership. Sometimes wealth is just reaching the point where the person who once had the power to wreck your day can no longer rent space in your mind without permission. I sat there for a long time after that, remembering the younger version of myself. The man in steel-toe boots and second-hand jackets. The man who thought love meant proving. The man who mistook being tolerated for being treasured. I don't judge him. He was doing the best he could with the lessons he had. But I'm grateful I outgrew him. Not because he was weak, because he didn't yet know that dignity grows faster once you stop watering relationships built on disrespect. By noon, I had 3 missed calls from project managers, 2 revised budget approvals waiting in my email, and a foundation gala calendar invite Imani wanted me to attend next month if I promised not to sneak out before dessert. Real life was already moving. That's another thing people don't tell you. Healing doesn't always come with cinematic music. Sometimes it looks like returning to your normal life without dragging yesterday's chains into it. Before I went back inside, I picked up my phone one more time and looked at Monique's text. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of completion. And if I'm being honest, that felt bigger than standing on that stage. Because money can change your address. Reputation can change how rooms receive you. But peace, real peace, changes what still gets access to your spirit after the room is gone. So if you ask me what I won that night, it wasn't the applause. It wasn't Monique's shock. It wasn't even the satisfaction of watching Terrence realize the deal he'd been bragging about belonged to the man he had underestimated all evening. What I won was something quieter. I won proof that the worst chapter of my life had not become the final draft of my identity. I won the kind of marriage where a woman arrives late and somehow still shows up right on time. I won the kind of success that doesn't need gold letters, rented confidence, or borrowed attention. And maybe most importantly, I won myself back from the version of me that once believed being loved meant shrinking first. So tell me honestly, if someone who once broke your confidence stood in front of you years later and finally saw what they threw away, would you give them closure? Or would you let silence finish the story?